Between the time when the oceans drank Atlantis and the rise of the sons of Arius, there was an age undreamed of. And unto this, Conan, destined to bear the jeweled crown of Aquilonia upon a troubled brow. It is I, his chronicler, who alone can tell thee of his saga. Let me tell you of the days of high adventure.
I'm still holding down 5 jobs, and we finally finished moving into our new house. We carried a treadmill up 2 flights of stairs yesterday, and I'm fine because I was mostly serving as a spotter, but my husband threw out his back. So that's, for all of you who ever endeavor to carry a treadmill up the stairs, up 2 flights of stairs perhaps, tricks that work. If you wrap a strap around the bottom of it and then put the strap on your shoulder, you can do a lot more lifting from your shoulder than you can with your back. So, word to the wise. You can also look up tips for moving pianos, and that's pretty useful for moving a treadmill. But yeah, totally random, unrelated update from.
No, it's not totally unrelated because nothing, this movie made me feel so out of shape. Like I literally watched it on an exercise bike, biking the entire movie, right? Not a hard biking, slow pedaling, but I slow pedaled the whole movie because, I'm a nerd. I need to get to the gym more often. I haven't been to the gym since COVID. Like the gym kind of pissed me off, but I haven't been back to the gym since then. And I need to get, every week I pass this gym called Crom Fitness, CROM Fitness, with like a helmet and like the horns and everything. And I'm like, that's badass. Maybe I need to join that gym, but, being the nerd that I am, I got accused by my friends of being not a nerd because I was too good at ultimate frisbee when we were in college or something like that. But today on the show, we've got someone who we've given a little flack for in the past for like not qualifying as a nerd for being into jujitsu and all this manly stuff. And like, he's got like a website, Kneel to No One. And I'm like, okay, if we're going to do Conan, this is the perfect person for it, right? So his name is Anthony Tank Mansfield, and he hosts a podcast called What You Into. It's a weekly podcast dedicated to deep diving into people's hobbies and collections. The latest one I listened to was about exotic animal collecting. So he goes down this rabbit hole with his guests that leads to strange, educational, and funny conversations. It's pretty cool. I'm a pretty big fan of the show. Some of the theme collections that he's done that our listeners might be interested in is in episode 64, The Slasher, greatest of all time, The Slasher Goat with Jamie, do you say it Filer, I guess?
Yep, Jamie Filer. Jamie
Filer and Justin 3000 Stewart, a Friday the 13th collection. Talking Saw with Paul. That's Paul Gonzalez, and that was the Saw collection. And episode 68, The Future's Not Set, with Cody Hucker from the Bastard Sermon podcast. And that was the Terminator themed collection. And of course, I should plug, there's an upcoming episode featuring yours truly. We talked about podcasting.
We did.
I have no memory of this because like Tank lives in Cincinnati, and that's where my family is. And when I came home to visit my family, my dad just started plying me with all this like craft beer from Cincinnati that I can't get here. And so I had pre-gamed the show. Then I get out there, and then we got to have drinks with his wife, Lauren. And then we have to have more beers. And like, it wasn't even able to finish all the beers. So I was like, I'm going to go on the show and I'm going to be great and witty and everything. And like, I was just probably too plastered. I don't know. I have very little memory of the show. Anyway, Tank's also an accomplished illustrator who organized this thing called Six Bomb Boards. It's like a live art group that creates drawings in public spaces and events. And when he isn't podcasting or drawing, he can be found hanging out in that same basement with Lauren and their French bulldog Jet, who often makes unscheduled appearances on the podcast. That's my favorite part of the show. Every time there's like, they'll be in the middle of talking something intense, and then suddenly there's like, Jet! Jet! Stop it! Sorry, listener. And it's like, and then there's this break, and then it comes back. Please welcome to the show, Anthony Tank Mansfield.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? How's it going? What's happening?
Glad you're with us.
Yeah, stoked to be here. We get to talk back-to-back Conan flicks today. This is gonna be pretty cool. I'm stoked about this. It was a fun rewatch of both those films this week. So yeah.
Before we get into that, I've got a little bit of housekeeping to do here, namely correcting the record. On our second anniversary show, we referred to the recipe with the gaffy stick garnish as worms in the dirt. That was actually a dessert from the Dune show. The Tusken Raider recipe was actually a drink. That was black melon milk, which we got off the official Star Wars website. Today we're going to be talking about Conan the Barbarian. We are part history podcast, so I want to give a little background to the sword and sorcery genre. In September of 1927, aspiring writer Robert E. Howard submitted a story called The Shadow Kingdom about a barbarian from Atlantis to horror magazine Weird Tales. And they bought it and they published it 2 years later. It blended horror with elements of action, fantasy, historical, romance, mythology, and sword fighting. And it blended all those things into a new subgenre that flourished for a while in the pre-war period before it sort of died out to the PI, noir, detective genre. Then it started to get revived in the 60s. In May of 1961, fanzine Amra published a letter to the editor by fantasy novelist Michael Moorcock suggesting that epic fantasy be used for the subgenre name. If there's one thing nerds do, like we were just talking about, it's argue. So in 1961, in July, in Amra, another writer in the genre, Fritz Leiber, issued a rebuttal stating that, quote, this field should be called the sword and sorcery story, unquote, because he claimed it, quote, accurately describes the points of culture level and supernatural element, unquote, as well as being useful in distinguishing these stories from other popular pulp genres. All right. So automatically, right from the start of the revival of this genre, there's like an argument over what to call it. In the mid 1960s, a trio of writers, Lynn Carter, L. Sprague de Camp, and John Jakes, formed the Swordsmen and Sorcerers Guild, aka SAGA, SAGA for short. Originally, it was a group of drinking buddies, and they published an anthology called Flashing Swords, with an exclamation point. Flashing Swords! Annually from 1973 to 1981. So that's pretty much the revival era in print of the sword and sorcery genre. From 1974 to 1981, they convinced the World Science Fiction Society to let them give a Gandalf Award to fantasy authors at the World Science Fiction Convention. And despite the name Swordsmen and Sorcerers Guild, one of the early members was a woman, Andrea Norton. And by the time they dissolved in the 1980s, a third of them were women. In 1970, Leiber's Swords and Deviltry is published. That year, Marvel Comics also starts publishing Conan the Barbarian comics. In 1972, Michael Moorcock's Elric of Melniboné, however you say it, is published. In October 4th, 1980, a favorite of mine when I was a kid, Sunday morning cartoon Thundar the Barbarian debuts, and it runs for 2 seasons. March 16th of 1982, Conan the Barbarian starring Arnold Schwarzenegger is released in Spain, but then April 30th of 1982, The Sword and the Sorcerer is released worldwide. So it becomes the first real sword and sorcery in the sword and sorcery boom of the 80s on film. And then in May 14th, 1982, Conan the Barbarian is released in the US.
Folks will be interested to know that even though there is this new resurgence of this sword and sorcery genre, originally when Oliver Stone approached the script, he actually planned to rewrite it as a post-apocalyptic future story where Conan is battling against mutants and defective clones and things like that. And fortunately, John Milius, who was hired to direct by Dino De Laurentiis, decided, nope, we're going to do this as a medieval, much more faithful adaptation. And thanks to that, it made the budget significantly smaller. They managed to make Conan the Barbarian on a $20 million budget. It ended up grossing about $68 million with its first release. And then, of course, with home video, since this is now a cult film, it's up to $300 million. So really successful, deciding to make it a more faithful film. Of course, this character, a lot of people draw connections between Conan and Genghis Khan, and I'm sure we'll get into that when we talk about the film. But some of the fun things that come with a story of this level of mayhem is how do you handle the special effects? And John Milius was really determined not to use too much computer-generated effects or animation, but instead built everything mechanically. And we can discuss later whether we think that approach ultimately wins out. But one of the highlights is that Arnold Schwarzenegger, of course, did all of his own stunts. He spent 18 months preparing for the role, learning horseback riding and sword fighting and, continuing to build up his body. But of course, the problem was there could be no body double for Arnold Schwarzenegger, who could approximate his size and muscularity. So he did all of his own stunts, including some of the scenes where he's running from the wild dogs, which were apparently really vicious, and the trainers were ripped apart in some instances, and there are outtakes where Arnold is really fearing for his life as he's running away from them, which again is a trait drawn from Genghis Khan, famously afraid of dogs. Of course, balanced on the other side, Arnold as the ultimate hero, we have also the ultimate villain. James Earl Jones, in an interview, explained why he took the role. He had a background in television and mostly theater. He was really just starting to break into film with Star Wars. And he said that he took the role of Thulsa Doom because he viewed him as a prehistoric Darth Vader. And he knew at the time that Conan the Barbarian would be a very important film. Not something the critics would like, and not something he was sure audiences would come see. But he believed that it was continuing the work that Star Wars had started of creating this epic adventure that James Earl Jones believed all people were hungry for. Only other note about production, this is something I didn't know until I started digging into this, which was at the time that they were filming this in Spain, there was an attempted coup that the Civil War almost restarted at the time that they were filming. And they were actually delayed a couple days because there were tanks rolling through the streets, and the authorities in Spain didn't really feel great about having this film crew nearby that had all these swords and explosives and everything that they had to make the effects.
What's funny about that is they were originally scheduled to shoot in Yugoslavia, and there was an ongoing revolution going on there, so they decided, no, let's go shoot someplace safe like Spain. I have a couple of notes, production notes also that I wanted to say. Ed Pressman and Ed Summer were the producers behind this, and they had originally hired Roy Thomas from Marvel, but after reading the script for Platoon, they chose Oliver Stone to write the script. But thank God that didn't happen, because as he said, he wanted it to be post-apocalyptic. There was like armies of pigmen and shit, It's like, so they also wanted Ridley Scott to direct, and Ridley turned them down, and that's when they said, screw it, let's just sell this package to Dino De Laurentiis. And so when Dino came on, he decided that the script was too violent. So he was going to have John Milius rewrite it.
Hold on. Dino De Laurentiis said that it was too violent?
Yes.
God.
Dino De Laurentiis said it was too violent. What I find hilarious is he got John Milius, who is, like, if you've ever seen The Big Lebowski.
Yes.
John Goodman's character is based on John Milius, right? So he's this complete macho, like, rote Dirty Harry, wrote Rambo, all of that stuff, and he's the guy Dino decided to bring in to tone it down. Milius had never read Conan before, but he had a Viking sword and was very into Vikings, and he was known as Viking Man, and that was his surfer name. He was a surfer. He recruited his champion surfer buddy, Jerry Lopez, known as Mr. Pipeline, the main guy in surfing at that time, to play Subutai in this. And then also he had seen All That Jazz with Sandal Bergman and said that if there's ever been a Valkyrie on Earth, it's that woman. So that's why he wanted her for this. One last thing, the movie received an X rating 3 times before they submitted a 4th cut of it, and it got it down to an R.
Gee, I wonder why. I mean,
can I just note, Sandal Bergman, her background was all in musical theater, which is insane given how convincing she is with the sword.
Most of them aren't actors, right? You got one bodybuilder, one surfer, one dancer. Those are the main characters of the good guys. But I want to bring Tank in here now. He's the one that when we were doing sword and sorcery stuff, he was all about jumping on doing the Conan films. So, Tank, what are your thoughts about Conan the Barbarian?
Shit rules. I mean, it basically the first film, like just the opening 25 minutes is just hit after hit after hit. Like, you open this film with a bunch of marauders coming up over a hill. They're decked out on these sick horses with like foxtails and shit hanging off. There's one dude running with like 2 Rottweilers, and the Rottweilers have helmets on. Let's go.
Yes. Well, I like it. It starts with that score. It's Basil Poldoris is the guy. I spin this score all the time. It was hard to find for a long time. It was out of print.
Now you can find it on YouTube. I accidentally played that instead of the movie when I was trying to watch the movie.
So, and then it opens with a Nietzsche quote.
I didn't remember that it started with the Nietzsche quote, which just shows the last time I saw this, I think I must have still been really into Nietzsche, like really into it. So it probably just didn't faze me. I'm like, of course it starts with the Nietzsche quote. And then this time I was like, well, that's interesting. That's a choice.
Yeah.
It's a choice.
But fitting. It absolutely fits the film.
It's almost an accident because none of them were Conan fans, right? The only person that was a Conan fan was Jerry Lopez, not George Lopez.
George Lopez.
Jerry
Lopez. Be a plot
Lopez.
Twist.
Jerry Lopez was a fan of Conan, but he was the only one. But because they were all into the same thing, Milius was into historical fiction and Genghis Khan and Nietzsche and stuff like that, all the same stuff that Howard was into, they managed to get it right, like almost accidentally, And then, as Tank mentioned, Thulsa Doom's men come in and they kill everyone. They kill his mother and, just cut him off. He's sold into slavery as a child. And he's taken to work the Wheel of Pain.
They also don't explain what that wheel powers. It's like, is this like an old timey power plant or what's going on here? All you know is it's just a montage to show us like Conan bulking up from like child to teenager to now adult, and by the end of it, he's just rocking this thing by himself.
So it is a grain mill. They don't say that in the film, and in fact, originally it was just the Wheel of Pain. Like, that's the way it was written. And then, like, the guy who was building it was like, well, this thing should actually do something, you know? So he put in the grain milling stones, and so like it crushes grain. That's what it's for,
So it's really the Wheel of Grain.
It's the
Not the
wheel
wheel
of
of
grain. All right.
And
yeah,
then,
but
you got to say it hardcore, be like, wheel of grain,
But it does have that montage transition through all the seasons, and then finally when Schwarzenegger looks up and like people go crazy because he was like a big star at that moment,
At this point in the film, we're probably almost 20 minutes in, and he still has not spoken. So it's like one of the things I love so much about this film is that they do so much character building before the character even speaks. It's amazing.
Well, I think that is one of the reasons that Schwarzenegger succeeded as an actor, because he had this thick accent, and they decided, or he decided, or his agent decided, whoever it was, that he play roles where he didn't have to speak. And a lot of bodybuilders or people that come to acting from other fields, pro wrestlers, rock stars, whatever, they tend to be terrible, at least the first 10 times out or something like that. But he took roles like this in
Yeah.
The Terminator and stuff like that, where he has to say one line here and one line there.
Just
I don't
enough to
think-
get him through the movie.
Yeah.
I think it's akin to kind of like if you look at the Road Warrior and the way like basically Mad Max maybe has like 10 lines through that whole film, but you understand that story. No matter, you can literally watch the Road Warrior without sound and what's happening. And that's kind of the same thing that happens in this movie, where you don't really need a lot of script and words. Just watch the action on screen. You'll understand what's happening. And Schwarzenegger comes off kind of the same way of like Kane Hodder in the Jason movies, or Gunnar Hansen as Leatherface in Texas Chainsaw, where a lot of what he's doing is emoting with his body, and it's his physical, presence, and it's his body language that carries himself as a character, and who he is and what he's doing.
Yeah, I feel the same way about action movies in general. A lot of really great action movies don't have a lot of dialogue, and they don't really need it. Like, I think of like Dredd. Dredd is another great example of an action film with very little dialogue, and it doesn't really need it, I think one of the first lines we actually hear him say in this movie is the Genghis Khan line,
Yes, crash enemies.
Conan, what is best in life?
I had forgotten that there was a guy who comes before him who gets it wrong. And I actually like that guy's answer of like the open step. I was like, oh, that's so poetic.
Okay, history lesson. This is a Genghis Khan quote. And the person that first answers is supposedly the historical Subutai. Subutai's name was taken for the Jerry Lopez character. But Genghis Khan asked this, and Subutai says, the wind on the steppes, open plain, a hawk on your wrist or something like that. I don't know, whatever. And then he's like, wrong. It's to crush your enemies, to see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentations of their women. So, yeah.
Hear the lamentations of the women.
What I love about the original Genghis Khan quote, though, is that he also adds like ride their horses. Like there's like that's the one thing that's missing from the Conan version. But ride their horses is a fun one too.
To get to this point where he makes the speech, we saw him as a child. He gets sold as a slave to a guy to become a gladiator, and Conan doesn't really understand what's happening. He just gets chucked in a pit with some dude that has fangs, and he's just really confused for the first 30 seconds. And then my man goes off. Like, he instantly understands what this is. And you get a montage of him, which in just cool different sets of armors, all sorts of different daggers, blades, like weird knife hand things. And he is fucking everybody up. And that becomes like his whole deal, is like it becomes this warrior, this fighter, this gladiator, and people start to love him for the first time in his life. Like he's cheered, and Conan starts feeding off of that. And they make this point where he's like, life, death no longer matters. All that matters is the crowd. And because of his physical ability, he then like learns to read, which I don't know how they teach him how to read, but he's like got a fucking scroll out and he's reading. And yeah.
I love the line. They say like it's not, they didn't say they taught him how to read. They said they made books available. It's a hilarious way to describe what happened.
Yes, and he was introduced to the pleasures of women. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, before we get to the pleasures of women and reading, since Tank, you do jujitsu, you're a big wrestling fan, all of that stuff. I need a rating for this fight scene. At least we saw a couple of pit fights, but it was mostly a montage, but there was mainly the one with the guy with the sharpened fangs and stuff like that. How would you rate this as far as movie fight scenes go?
It was pretty good. I like seeing him get wrist control and trying to work that Kimura there at the beginning. Like when you see him pin that arm back, I was like, hey, Schwarzenegger understands how this works. But then he just starts like dropping bows in the guy's head. I'm like, also very effective. So yeah, I really enjoyed the fight scenes in it. There's one later where there's like there's some misses, like you literally see them miss the punch. But overall, I really enjoyed the action in this movie and especially the gladiator scenes.
I guess they just decide like, he's gone as far as he can as a gladiator or something. Whatever, we got nothing left for you, so let's just set him free at this point,
I got the impression that they set him free because they knew he couldn't be trapped there very long. And if they don't set him free, he will just eventually kill them all. There was some sort of line about like he's been caged too long or something like that. I read that as kind of threatening, but then they send the dogs after him. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So Robert E. Howard didn't write how Conan came to get his sword, but in the first Conan book, they were collected by Lancer and Ace paperbacks and stuff like that. And they were a mix of stories that Robert E. Howard wrote himself and pastiches that were put together by his successors. L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter were the two main ones. And I think de Camp wrote a story that he claimed was based on Robert E. Howard's notes called The Thing in the Crypt, where he breaks into a crypt or stumbles across this crypt and there's a skeleton and the skeleton has like a sword and he takes the sword. Now, in the story, if I remember right, I read it decades ago at this point, the skeleton actually comes to life and he has to fight this undead skeleton and, he gets the sword and leaves with the sword and all that. And that's the thing in the crypt was the skeleton. In this, you think it's going to happen, right? The hand moves but I liked that they didn't do it yet. Like it would have been too early to start like
the supernatural. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like really in the next encounter where we get the supernatural, where he's wandering and he finally comes across this hut and there's this hot witch, because all women are hot in sword and sorcery movies and stuff. I guess she was gonna like turn him into slave or something. I don't know. Again, for her, like she like seduces him, but then goes all like, wolfy on him. Like they call her the wolf witch in the script. Like, I don't know that she looked like a wolf, but she definitely looked like a freaky monster, And while they're getting it on, he has to like throw her into the fire. So we learn straight up, sorcery is almost always bad in sword and sorcery. The good guy always carries a sword. The bad guy always uses magic. He meets Subutai, her previous victim or whatever, chained up. And this is where Jerry Lopez comes in. And Jerry Lopez, as I mentioned before, he was one of the first people to surf the bonsai pipeline. He's Hawaiian and he's actually mixed ethnicity, but he's from Hawaii. And that's like where the waves break. And there's that perfect tube. Surfing had always been on top of the wave before him. And then in the Jerry Lopez era was the surfing through the wave. So I've always thought that the Patrick Swayze character in Point Break was based on him, because he's the guy that turned surfing into the Zen kind of thing. The philosophical part that they bring out in that movie. I think that's why Milius wanted him for Subutai, because he's like the philosopher type, Zen philosophy type guy, Like one of the first conversations they have after they escape is like about God,
Yeah.
the gods.
I love the line. So, what gods do you pray to?
Yeah.
Just like very casual, just, and then there's a little bit of one-upmanship, but yeah, I thought that scene was so great.
Crom is mighty, Then Subutai is just like, well, my god is the sky. Your god lives under the sky, so my god is better. Okay.
And then they're friends forever.
Total
Exactly.
BFFs.
It's shortly after that they go to the city and, sort of like, oh, there's no wind here. Why does it smell? Arnold punches a camel.
Gratuitous camel punching is a necessity in this. So yeah, he punches a camel, which becomes important later on. We'll talk about that again. We'll come back to camel punching.
Yeah, we'll revisit that.
But that is about as humorous as this movie gets. Milius was really loath to do too much comic relief. In fact, right here is where there was a scene where Milius makes a cameo in the film selling them lizard on a stick.
Yes.
So he sells them lizard on a stick. He cut himself out of the film because he thought that it just tonally didn't match and stuff like that. So hats off to him, because I don't think a lot of people would have the restraint to cut their one part out of their own movie. I think we can jump to this idea that they're going to raid the tower, right?
Yeah.
This is where they meet an actual thief, Valeria. Valeria was one of the characters from Howard's Conan series, but Valeria doesn't appear at this stage of Conan's life. She's much later, and she's like more of a pirate. But anyway, this one's a thief. She joins up with them almost immediately. The three of them become a team, and they're going to scale this tower. It's reminiscent of a couple of different Conan stories. The Tower of the Elephant. There was another one, the one where he fights the giant ape, but I forget what that was called. Anyway, Rogues in the House. I think those are the two stories that this is most like. But they actually, one of the great things about this is they didn't do the Adam West Batman thing where they turned the set on the side and had them like fake like they were going up. They built a real tower and they're like, okay, go climb that.
Yeah.
Fortunately, they had three very athletic actors who could do that.
Once they finally get to the top, I think that's when we get that first line. They say, oh God, what does that smell like down there? And she says, do you want to live forever? And then this becomes her recurring call or question to Conan. And she has told them that they have to go first because they didn't bring a rope. So
yeah,
they get down there, and it's clear that our main villain is not going to make an appearance in this scene, but still we are going to get the serpents that we have heard so much about. Along with a really creepy cult thing, which this film was made in 1982, or filmed in 1981, so relatively shortly after the Charles Manson murders. This was still part of a wave of films that were all pretty anti-cult. And this scene is one of the first tastes we get of not just the murderous side that we saw in the opening scene, but also of all these helpless people who have fallen under the spell.
Yeah, the 70s, the late 60s, and most of the 70s, when the sword and sorcery genre was at its height, cults were a big thing in the popular consciousness. They were going on all the time. And I think Milius specifically mentions Jonestown Massacre. Jim Jones was his big inspiration for Thulsa Doom's cult. Within a couple of years of it coming out, I'm sure I saw it. I don't know that I was aware of the cults that much yet. I think I had read Helter Skelter, but I wasn't totally aware that there was a lot of cults going on. But nowadays, when I go back and I rewatch this, and I've watched this about a dozen times since then, it's unavoidable. I can't not make that connection in my head.
I grew up in a Christian conservative household, so anything that wasn't evangelical Christian was a cult. So
Turns out you were in a cult.
Yeah, exactly.
I know.
It's like a reverse Uno card. You're like, wait, what the hell?
I know, right?
So they end up
Killing an amazing handmade snake.
giant
Yes.
snake. It's funny because I was just listening to the What You Into about the exotic animals, and like I forget who the guest was, but he's talking about like if he doesn't want a giant snake because he'd do something stupid and then like one day just end up dead because like the anaconda would have because he smelled like food, you know.
Yeah, that was Max Mahler, and yeah, he had fed was working with one of his other pets before feeding the snake, and the snake kind of started eyeing him up, and it's like, oh, I forgot to wash my hands, and so the snake just smelled, what was still on his hands and interpreted him as food, and
Ooh.
yeah, not good, but
No.
yeah, not good.
So he was saying something about how he didn't want a really big one, like an anaconda or something like that.
Yeah, no way.
This is
I
even
don't
bigger
want
than
to
that.
own an animal that can swallow a whole human body.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's hard pass on that one.
I think you got to draw some lines somewhere, So they escape, and then they're like living the high life, high on the hog, spending all the jewels and stuff like that. When they come to the attention of the king, and they're brought in to an audience with a king. He tells them that Thulsa Doom has been a thorn in his side all these years, and now his daughter has become a member of the cult. And originally they thought they were in trouble, but he offers them all this money, rubies, all his wealth. All he wants is them to bring back his daughter. So now we get to the real quest of the film.
It's such a great monologue. There comes a time when jewels lose their sparkle, when a throne room becomes a prison, when there's nothing left but a father's love for his child. I mean, that's, I think, what makes Conan work as a film. Silent but strong hero, balanced by these side characters who give these quasi-Shakespearean monologues that weight down the film in a good way, make it feel like this is all really important. The quest is important. This is a big story. This is not just an oily, beautiful, godlike man that we're watching destroy things over the course of, but it's scenes like this that really help make the stakes of the film work.
Okay. Thulsa Doom's mountain. He gets one of the cultists to go behind a rock or something with him. He knocks him out and takes his uniform. This is a standard. Everybody does this. Indiana Jones did it the same year with a Nazi. It's like, yeah.
He karate chops this man. He literally karate chops this man and knocks him out.
And then dons his robes and then goes up. But it doesn't really fool the LA Raiders linebacker guy and Sven, the other bodybuilder that's in this. They recognize
Sven
him
was unfazed.
What's great, like Conan does himself no favors here. Like once he gets the coldest outfit on, he just keeps going around like smiling huge at everybody he passes. He's like, and it's like, dude, incognito, like chill, bro. Like try to blend in with the surroundings. Like you're already a 6'4", 275-pound man that you stick out a little bit. It doesn't help that you're like, oh, I'm the new guy.
I think that he was trying, that was his idea of what a stoned hippie cult would be like, I think that he thought he was blending, he does look baked. I mean, he does look pretty baked in that scene. Anyway, so one of my favorite parts is they capture him, and then Thulsa Doom, by the way, another example of how they didn't really read Conan. Thulsa Doom is actually a skull-faced villain of Kull, which is the other barbarian hero that Robert E. Howard created. But to be fair, Howard himself, he wrote more Kull stories than he did Conan stories, but Conan became more popular, so he would just take a Kull story, change the names, and it would be a Conan story, because Kull and Conan were so similar. But anyway, Thulsa Doom tells him, like, you think you have power because you're strong and you can wield a sword and all that? That's not power. And he, like, orders one of the women to jump to their death, and he's like, that's power, you know?
Yeah, flesh is stronger than steel.
The thing that angered him most is he killed his pet snake, and then the guy, the big bodybuilder dude, he's like, and you know, he's been beside himself with grief. You should feel bad. He lectures him for like making the other big bodybuilder dude sad because he hand raised the snake.
Raised it from an egg.
Shame on you.
The guy has like this sad look on his face.
There's definite Return of the Jedi Rancor pit monster trainer vibes. Like, you know, after Luke kills the Rancor monster and the trainer guy's like, oh, and like really sad and mournful. And this dude in this movie is the same way, where it's just like, how could you kill the 60-foot long snake that we were feeding virgins to? Like, you monster.
So he sentenced him to be crucified on what they call the Tree of Woe. Yeah.
Epic.
Which is, yeah.
Name.
Yeah. It's like if the tree on the cover of that U2 album was like 10 times bigger and you could like nail a human to it.
The Joshua
whatever.
Tree of Woe.
Which is what I call that album, the Joshua Tree of Woe.
Hey now.
I would
Don't
rather
rip too hard on them.
I was gonna say I'd rather be crucified than listen to you too. So yeah, let's get up on this Tree of Woe.
All right, now I have seen them on several tours and I am a fan, so be kind.
All right, the Tree of Woe. He's on this thing, and this is one of the more badass things he does too. The buzzards start gathering around ready to eat him, you know, and like one gets too close and he just like chomps into it. Kills it by biting it and it falls to the ground.
And then spits out the feathers.
Spits out the feathers.
Yeah.
We also get classic Schwarzenegger grunting as he's ripping the thread of this buzzard. So it's like, and then you just see this buzzard drop dead at his feet, and then he's just still chilling there in the sun, dying.
What I should mention is a ton of shit on this movie was super dangerous. Like, they would never do it today. Like, when they were in the tower and like one of the guys gets thrown down into that pit, he just landed on a bunch of boxes. Like, it, like they just threw a bunch of cardboard, but like, this is something that like backyard wrestling or like, you know, like kids making their first movie would do, you know, that. And then this buzzard, they used a real buzzard, right? They used the actual, so like the medic had to come up, you know, I think it was like they replaced it at the last minute with a taxidermied one, but it was still real. So they had to like come up and wash his mouth out with alcohol and stuff like that, because like they didn't know what nasty shit this buzzard actually had, you know?
Yeah, and just speaking of washing your mouth out with alcohol, one of the things about this film is the fake blood. They had originally mixed it with water, but it was so cold when they were out filming that the fake blood was freezing. So they had to mix it with vodka in order to keep it in its liquid form. And not everyone spat out the fake blood that was like in their mouth or whatever. There was a lot of vodka lost.
Lost.
Yeah.
In quotations.
Okay, so let's get on to the final confrontation here.
They rescue Conan. They take him back to the wizard. He's like, we can bring him back, but you're gonna have to pay a price for it. And Valeria's like, yo, whatever, just, you know, get this guy up. And so then there's this big storm, some freaky CGI smoke ghost, and the thief and the Valkyrie like fight the smoke ghost to keep Conan. And then next morning he just kind of wakes up like hungover, and he's like, oh, I'm back.
Yeah, part of this ritual, they paint Conan, all his exposed skin, with symbols. And there was a Japanese movie, I forget what it was. I remember seeing it a long time ago. I want to say it was Kaidan or Kwaidan. It can be translated either way. I think that was the movie. I'm not sure. But it was one of these supernatural Japanese ghost story things where they forget to paint the guy's ears. And so the evil spirits can see just two ears floating around, and they like ripped his ears off.
Ugh.
If you've seen that movie, you'll recognize this in that. But yeah. They save his life, and then they go back to rescue the princess. They paint their bodies with this really cool camouflage. It's like grease paint, like, except instead of just being the face, it's like their whole bodies, you know?
Okay.
They looked
so
amazing.
Let's talk about about the fact that they look like they came straight out of the Hungry Like the Wolf video from Duran Duran.
It was the 80s. What do you want?
It was the most 80s scene of the whole film, in my opinion.
It was pretty cool. And Sandal, she is so cat-like, like so graceful. And you really see it in this next scene where they're like invading the
orgy.
The orgy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's more than an orgy. It's a cannibalistic orgy because they're drinking split pea and hand soup. And it's literally like just this big giant cauldron of green pea
Of
soup.
body parts and green stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know how many orgies you've been to, but after hour 3, you need some carbohydrates, you need some proteins, and that's where hand soup comes in handy. So yeah, it's totally makes sense.
Certainly not a great lubricant. So
no, not good. It is funny, like, because like watching it back on the Blu-ray, I did take a second. Is that a hand? And then I was like, oh shit, that is a hand. And you see like carved up bodies when they're sneaking in because they're like the henchmen are getting the cauldron, and you see people that are split like cattle. It's like, what is happening in this temple? And so you realize that, oh yeah, this cult is bad, but now it's like cannibalistic bad, which is very, very bad.
Yeah.
Like cannibalistic bad is worse than regular bad.
Yeah, cannibalism at an orgy. You got people eating other people and then eating other people.
Well, what I like is when they're dishing out, they have a giant ladle. They have a giant ladle to dish out the soup. And so one woman is bringing the soup to all the other people. Mm-hmm. And she goes up there and like they dish some out to her, and she's like, I'm gonna keep that piece for myself. Like she reaches in and takes a hand and starts nibbling on the hand. Anyway,
this is my favorite body part.
Exactly.
I love snacking on fingers.
Yeah, who doesn't like finger foods?
This is the scene where we see Thulsa Doom transform into the snake.
Yes.
Which, in my memory, this was a much bigger part of the film. And so watching it again, I was like, oh, it's just this like one little scene. But it's stuck. That's the scene that sticks with me when I think about this. They're riding off with the princess.
Yeah. And this is when Thulsa Doom, he just has snakes everywhere, and he'll just take a snake and turn it into an arrow, and he shoots Valeria. Unlike Conan, who, they do all this magic ritual to bring back to life, they like pull this snake out of her and like, oh, well, I guess she's dead.
I love this death scene. The line that she says, "Let me breathe my last breath into your mouth," which is a very romantic sentiment, but the wording is terrible.
Not if you're a barbarian. Like that's
I guess
like
so. It's as sexy as it gets.
Well, she gets
Let me breathe.
Sounds weird.
She gets the Viking funeral, like on land, not the boat, but she gets the pyre and all of that. And now he's pissed, because yeah.
Well, there's this great scene that we didn't talk about earlier where like before all this goes down and he they steal the jewel and they get rich and finally like Valeria and Conan are dating or whatever you want to call it. They're together. She tells him the story about like looking for warmth and passing by other people's tents and seeing people together, but she was always cold and alone. And now she has Conan. Now she's warm and they're together. And then as she dies, with the last breath line, she's also saying like she's cold and she wants to be warm. And so you get this idea that they're really attached. Like this isn't just another one of like Conan's like just a hookup. Like he cares about her, she cares about him. And then we get the funeral pyre scene. And another great Conan line where the thief guy is like, Conan can't cry, I gotta cry for him. And that's being a bro.
Yes. Yeah,
like,
that was a good scene.
When your bro is so hard that he can't cry over his dead girlfriend and you come in and you cry for him, that's being a dude.
Yeah, that's being
Definitely.
the ultimate dude. I noticed that when Valeria was burned, they had that kind of like weird explosion.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking like, what would cause that explosion? And at first I thought, well, maybe what happened with the witch somehow affected that moment. And then also I was thinking, well, she did kind of make the deal with the devil like I don't care what the price is, please save Conan. So maybe that was also part of that magic.
I think it's just part of the Conan world that when women catch on fire, they explode. I mean, that's the scientific angle I'm going with.
It happened with the witch.
Women are magic, so
Yeah.
Yeah, they just blow up, spontaneously combust.
No one knows what makes women work in this universe.
it's because it's written by men.
Okay. So let's just jump to the final confrontation here, because keep in mind, Star Wars came out in 1977. ILM was actually hired to do some stuff on this. They did that weird CGI demons attacking Conan while he was like on the edge of life. This is 82.
Between Empire and Return of the Jedi,
between
basically.
Empire and now, the reason I bring this up is in Empire, we have James Earl Jones' most famous line, Luke, I am your father, right? He does that whole thing, right? In this, they're on the steps, and James Earl Jones calls him son and keeps saying that, like,
I am the wellspring from which you flow.
Yeah. So it's like, it's kind of like the ancient or medieval version of I am your father, right? But he tries his Jedi mind trick. He just stares at his eyes, and he did this a couple of times. He did it with Conan's mom in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
and then you think it's gonna work for a second or two, and then he just like whoo, decapitates him, and the head goes boom, 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 rolling down the mountain, and then all these people are just like, well, it's not like they rush him or attack him. They're like, okay,
show's over,
Doom's
folks.
dead. Yeah,
Party's over, time to go home.
Yep.
I feel like James Earl Jones really carries the film after watching it again, and it's scenes like this that really, it feels like a climax. It doesn't feel like, okay, we've had a sequence of battles. It really does feel like that final confrontation that you're looking for. And I couldn't tell whether Conan kills him with with the broken father's sword, or whether he kills him with his own new sword. But I was gonna check with the experts on that, because he gets his father's sword is broken in the previous battle scene, and I think he has it with him. But I don't know if he just I wanted the poetic justice.
That particular sword is super iconic, and I would recognize it if it weren't for the fact that he just swings it so fast and boom, So
Yeah.
I don't know for sure which sword that is.
And they unfortunately didn't put too much importance on that. Otherwise, I think they would have made it a point to show which sword that was used to kill Thulsa Doom. That would have been a pretty cool detail for sure.
That would have been a nice cherry on top. And maybe it was, and we just didn't pick up on it. I don't know. So listeners, write in. We're GC8 podcast, letter G, letter C, number 8 podcast @gmail.com, and let us know if you think that he killed Thulsa Doom with his own sword or the original sword. We pretty much got to wrap it up here. Definitely want to thank Tank for being here. And you can find him at kneeltonoone.com and on Instagram @kneeltonoone. The podcast is, of course, called What You Into. Check it out. It is just fascinating. I don't know how he hasn't run out of hobbies yet.
There are so many. My mother-in-law asked me the same thing, and I'm like, dude, I don't know, over 100 episodes into this thing, that's not slowing down anytime soon.
Awesome.
That's pretty cool.
All right. Well, until next time, this is Eric.
This is Johanna.
This is Rosie.
Oh, this is Tank.
Yeah.
Sorry. I didn't know how it works. Sorry, I'm the guest.
Signing off.
Peace.
All right. No, he's no Phil Collins. I'll give you that.